Everyone, what's going on? Welcome back to another episode of The Real Results Show. We are live every Wednesday at 12 p.m. PST, 3 p.m. EST. We're interviewing real practitioners who have real results for themselves and their clients. And today is all about how self-care and a healthy mindset is an important part of the healing journey, an essential part, really, right? And it's something that's so interesting because we get really technical at FDN and we learned all these little biochemical pathways and all these things. But if you don't get this right first, I mean, you could forget about all of that because this needs to come first. And we're talking to my buddy Kurt Stradtman today. We've done an episode together on the FDN Thrive podcast, so always feel free to go check us out there. But Kurt, man, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Evan.
Cool. So I always start off the same way because I feel like it's really cool to get to know our practitioners and what they're all about. Give us a little background and summary. How did you get into the health space? Because this isn't typically something that people get into by accident.
Yeah. So I got into the holistic health space just because I wanted to help as many people as possible get well and stay well. I saw from very early on that the American healthcare system is really messed up and it's more of a disease management system. So I've just always really been interested in natural health and everything. And today, talking about self-care, I've always been such a fan of like pampering and organic skincare and stuff like that. And that's why I wanted to dive into about self-care, because there's really so much more to it than what you would typically think of as self-care.
Sure. And I mean, again, it's something that even if we do think about it, that's great, but most of us neglect it completely. I know I did that. I wouldn't have thought about self-care whatsoever, to be honest. So I think that's cool that you got into that. I mean, let's just start off with, what does that actually even mean to you? Let's define self-care, because it's probably more than just stuff with lotions or whatever, although that might be a part of it, right? So what's the general picture?
Yeah, so it's definitely a part of it. Most people, when they think of self-care, they think of pampering and getting massages and stuff like that. But, self-care is just something that brings about joy in a person. And oftentimes, if you're doing that typical, getting a massage and pedicure and stuff like that, that many people would label as self-care, that's something that you're dependent on someone else for. You're depending on someone else for that joy. It's a codependency, it's conditional. And breaking down self-care, there's so many different aspects to it. Self-care is really about being present in the moment. With as you're present with yourself, it really allows you to kind of feel happy for yourself. And again, you're not depending on someone else for that joy. And as you know, how the FDN approach and the holistic approach in general, you look at the entire body holistically as a whole. And if whatever you're working with a client for, whatever conditions or chronic illness that they have, you're looking for that root cause, you're looking for imbalances, within the body. But taking it, to a broader perspective and looking at the body as a whole, as the entire lifestyle, and identifying what elements of it are out of balance, can really help you on your whole healing journey. Because healing is an event. Healing is a journey, not an event. You didn't get unhealthy overnight, so you're not going to get healthy, overnight as well. It's all of those aspects for your lifestyle. So self-care is just simply anything that can nurture and fulfill a person on a deeper level. There's 6 areas of self-care that I want to focus briefly on each one today. There's a self-care wheel, and it's a big thing, a big tool used in the holistic health space and by like psychologists and stuff like that. But the one that I'm referencing is one that was created by Olga Phoenix. She's a well-being and trauma keynote speaker. She adapted the self-care wheel that we're referring to back in 2013, and it was adapted from a worksheet back in the mid-90s called Transforming the Pain. But she basically breaks it down into the 6 areas that self-care needs to be in existence: is psychological, emotional, spiritual, personal, professional, and physical. And you can actually measure someone's sense of well-being by using this worksheet and identifying, so it's a wheel, and identifying how close you are to the center or how far out can determine which areas of your life are out of balance and that you need, to focus on. So oftentimes when I'm talking about self-care, I'll refer back to blue zones and how blue zones operate. So if you're not familiar with blue zones, it's an area / town community. There's, I think, 6 of them that are most popular around the world, but they have the highest concentration of centurions, of people living over the age of 100. And so as they started researching them over the years to try and figure out, what makes these blue zones blue, what makes people, live so long, they realized that of those 6 areas, the residents of those towns, like, they're following that, those different aspects, the, personal, professional, physical, things like that.
That's really interesting about the blue zones, because I had only, I mean, I stumbled across it once and I heard, I think there's like, what, Okinawa, Japan, Ikaria, Greece. There's like Loma Linda, California. That's the only one that's not
Uh-huh.
an island or something. And
Yeah.
I just remember, like, immediately my paradigm at that time, Kurt, was limited to diet, because this was years ago. And I'm like, oh,
Hmm.
okay, well, they're all kind of eating different diets. This means nothing to me. And I tossed it away.
Yeah.
And I love that you just brought that up, because I've heard bits and pieces over time. And I remember one of the things, and maybe you've heard this story, but isn't there like a 100-year-old woman that still like gardens or bikes 6 days a week or something like that?
There's a
I mean,
bunch of them. That's the
cool.
that's the thing. Dan Wetner, I think is how you pronounce his name. He was the one that really brought light to blue zones. He got several grants from National Geographic to go and study them, and he spent a lot of time in Okinawa. But there was one instance to where he spoke with a guy that was from Sardinia, which is another of the islands. It's a blue zone, and the guy had cancer, was diagnosed with a terminal cancer. He lived in the United States, moved back to Sardinia to move in with his 80-year-old family. So this guy, I think, was in his 60s at the time, and his cancer went away, and he had no treatment or anything like that. And so it works, and the proof is in the pudding when you have all of these over 100 people still, doing construction and working and everything.
Right. Awesome. And guys, as always, we're giving away free stuff on the Real Results Show. And today we're giving away the FDN Thrive survey, which is just something that can help you figure out maybe some hidden stressors going on in your body, so that you can kind of get a hold of if you're dealing with chronic health issues. So, of course, with today's topic, drop the word self-care in the comments and we'll make sure someone gets back to you and gets that sent over. For those that are just tuning in, we're talking all about how self-care and a healthy mindset actually leads to health. And this is something I'll always admit, I said it in the beginning, I just overlooked this completely. I was so locked in and focused on the biochemistry that I never really thought about what's going on up here and how much I actually had to grow as an individual to even implement the stuff that I was learning about biochemistry. Because you can learn about it all you want. That doesn't mean you're going to go do the things. And self-care goes a lot deeper than that. We're talking to Kurt Stradtman, who is, of course, a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner. Now, Kurt, what does self-care look like for you specifically? Because I know for me, and I think this would meet your definition, it's hiking. It's probably one of my biggest ones. I got a lot, but hiking is, I could be having the worst day of my life, and you let me go out solo. I put an audiobook on this thing, or I'm literally, I'll listen to stuff from FDN. I like the more, that actually relaxes me, listening to the technical stuff. It's kind of weird like that. And you just send me off and it will instantly not be the worst day of my life anymore. So what does that look like for you?
My self-care is actually something I've really been working on lately, but for self-care for me, yes, I love, the pampering and skincare and stuff like that, but my self-care is working on boundaries, because the whole key word of self-care is self. Like, you're taking care of yourself, and that's something that I've been needing to work on for quite some time, and I didn't realize all the different areas of my life that, a lack of boundaries and stuff like that can really start to penetrate and really impact your psyche, and then that's affecting your health and everything from there.
And does this mean with work, relationships? Like, what does that look? Because in my head, immediately I'm thinking like, okay, I'm saying, because I've had problems with this, where I'm saying yes to everyone and anyone, even though they weren't
Uh-huh.
necessarily even expecting me to do that. So what is boundaries? Is that what that means for you, kind of relationship and job stuff?
Yeah, so the workplace is the easiest way for boundaries to be violated, because they're going to violate, you could have an employer that violates your time boundaries, or people who don't, put work away at, the end of the day kind of thing. But there's so many aspects of life that, you work on boundaries with. And it's the one thing I've started noticing is, as you start working on boundaries, it's not just filtering the people that are in your life, but it's also being able to say goodbye to the people that, no longer serve you and are toxic in your life. But I like to bridge that gap, that we're talking about self-care like hiking and, pampering and skincare, but bridging it to where even something as boundaries at work is, affecting it that way.
Okay. And so when you are applying this with either clients or to your own healing journey, because I know it's important, but for some of our listeners, they might not understand yet. Like, does that matter that much? I mean, to me, I'm just using one example with the hiking. I mean, there's a long list of things, but
Yeah,
no,
yeah.
without those, that's a major component. So like, how does this actually contribute to your own healing or maybe the healing of clients that you've had?
Because so every client, I make them fill out that wheel so that you
Okay.
can kind of see what parts are in balance. And for the most part, it's such a valuable teaching tool that I don't ever have to say anything. As they're following the chart and they're seeing it, they can start to see, and associate in their own head what's going on in their life and what's out of balance. And they can kind of see in black and white, just like, when you're giving a client the test results and they see it in black and white on paper, it's the same thing for that. You can see what parts out of balance. And as you're working on these different areas, how it's important to the healing journey, in my opinion, is you're able to find your purpose, which is a big thing. Once you have your purpose in life, you're able to do many great things. But going back to the Okinawa and the blue zone in Japan, they have a phrase called ikigai, which
Okay.
is the what gets you up in the morning. And because there's no word for retirement in Japanese, in the Japanese language. So ikigai is like this, the moment your eyes wake up in the morning, what is it that guides you up? What's making your feet hit the floor? And that's such an easier said than done question. Like
Mhm.
it's very thought provoking, and it's very challenging for many people to be able to answer that question. But once you have that sense of purpose and you understand, like, this is why I'm here, this is what I'm doing, everything else just starts to fall into place, and it just cascades into all areas of your life, and in that general healing process as well.
I really agree with that. I mean, I think that's spot on. I think it's tough because it was like an unlucky but a lucky, because a lot of the health issues in my life, especially mental ones, led to such a plummet at a very early age that it was either like, all right, well, we continue on this track or we have that kind of awakening, and that led to that purpose. And I mean, you're right. I cannot imagine doing something for 40, 50, or even 60 years, like a job or whatever, that I don't
Yeah,
love. And I'm not saying that we can't do some things that maybe aren't perfect while we're working to that. I'm just saying that can't be the goal, right? That's got to be such an important part of
yeah.
our lives. So I just want to go back to that because I want to make sure I didn't miss it, right? Because I think I'm trying to help people figure out their passion all the time, because again, I feel like I got lucky, so I don't know how to replicate that. What did you
Yeah.
say specifically helps them find their purpose? You said, I think it was referencing the wheel.
Referencing the wheel, but when you start understanding your boundaries and the type of people that are supposed to be in your life versus the ones that's not supposed to be in there, I
Mhm.
was saying that kind of cascades into the entire thing, to where um your whole healing journey is a response for that. Just like as
Got it.
in FDN, when you're working with someone, remember how the symptoms aren't the problem, they're a result of the problem, and
Mhm.
they're far separated from it. So once you start fixing these little symptoms per se, everything just falls into place afterward.
All right. So my biggest question then, because I think we've already addressed that self-care can look like so many different things, but I think the boundaries one is something that almost everyone can relate to, at least to some degree, whether it's work or with relationships. And I
Mhm.
know I've been historically terrible at that. I am someone that, and I like guilt myself. Like a client will be texting me at like 9 p.m. and I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to get back to them. I got to get back to them. And it inevitably leads to this overwhelm. So if I'm your client or whatever, like, how do you get me to actually set these boundaries and identify that I need them? And I have worked on this stuff a little bit. I'm just wondering, like, how do you even get someone out of that and value their boundaries to begin with?
Baby steps. You can't dive straight into it, and just because I'm like that, where if I get an email or I'm hearing from a client or something, I want to respond right then.
Mhm.
And it's very hard, because especially when people like us are wanting to heal, and wanting to help people, as many people as we can, it's hard to you know make them fit in that time, narrow little time window that you have in a day. But yeah, it's definitely baby steps. You can't dive headfirst and into it, just like as you're going through like an FDN protocol or something like that, you're taking little baby steps, and it's broken
Yeah,
into
completely.
little phases. So just slow and steady wins the race.
That's a really good point about the baby steps, because sometimes I look at like even my life now that has led to very positive outcomes in my health. And I'm thinking, I'm like, well, everyone can do that. But you realize, you can't do that overnight. Like there's a transition into, hey, well, I'm actually going to start eating organic. Or, hey, maybe this one food isn't serving me anymore. If you try to do all those at once, yeah, it is overwhelming. So I like the baby steps thing. I mean, one thing that I've tried to do is be mindful of this idea that I'm like, why am I so on demand? It's like, okay, well, this thing allows me to be. So do you find that like technology is a huge factor in these boundary issues? Because I mean, think about it. There was a time that, yes, all you could do, well, I mean, obviously, even before the phone, you couldn't call anyone. But with this thing, maybe you could call them on a landline, and that was totally inappropriate to do at 9 o'clock at night. But now it's not so weird to text someone at 9:30. Like, do you think that is what is playing a role in these boundaries being broken for so many of us? Is the technology?
I feel like technology has an impact on the entire psyche in general because, there was once upon a time where, there was just pagers out there and, somebody, a spouse or family member leaves for work at 7 a.m. They don't come home till 8 a.m. You call the restaurant to see if, there's, John Smith there or something like that. So as we've evolved in technology, we've grown accustomed to that on demand. And that's also, our mental state and our mindset has kind of grown accustomed to that as well because, we want our, videos to stream immediately. We want our coffee and our Keurigs to be ready, in a second. And so we come to expect that in all areas of our life. And I feel like, coming back to that baby steps, it's the same thing in people's healing journeys and stuff like that, is they have to be reminded it's not instantaneous. That's why you have, you're being promoted all these MLM companies for the next diet pill and the next, beach body shake and stuff like that, because people want instantaneous results.
Yeah.
And very early on in working with a client, you just have to remind them, the tortoise and the hare, that old fable, and it's still true today. You have to go slow. I used an example the other day, or I was told an example the other day, and it was comparing a snail climbing up a wall. If the snail stops, it starts to kind of regress and slide back. But as it slowly just pushes forward, it's going to reach, the ledge or the top or whatever it is that it's reaching for.
Sure. One of the funnier examples of the boundaries thing with the technology is that, being in my 20s, I grew up in this age where sixth grade, I got like that first flip phone, cell phone. And my mom, and she might watch, I love her, but she would be texting all day when I'm out with my friends, like, are you okay? Where you at? What are you doing? I'm like, Mom, what would you do if this was 20 years ago? And she's like, well, it's not 20 years ago. So, that was her excuse for that. But guys, if you're just tuning in, we're talking to Kurt Stradtman, and we're focusing today on how self-care and a healthy mindset are actually really important parts of the healing journey. And if you want to hear Kurt's like biochemical knowledge and blood chemistry knowledge, check out the FDN Thrive podcast, because that's what I thought. This was an even cooler topic when I saw it pop up, because I know it's coming from someone who can do both things. And the fact that you are addressing both of those things makes that probably even more powerful in your practice. And of course, just for tuning in, we're always giving away free stuff on the Real Results Show. So today we're giving away an FDN Thrive survey. And this is something that can be used to actually find unique hidden healing opportunities in your own body. So just drop the word self-care in the comments and we'll get someone hooked up with you so that you can get that survey. All right, Kurt. So I'm curious if you have any like cool client stories where maybe self-care was actually like a majority of the part of their healing, because typically we always ask for, practitioners' client stories on this. And it might be like, oh, well, we found something really cool on a gut test or a hormone test, but I like this topic. Have you had any clients that just were completely neglecting the self-care area, and then with your help, they focused on it more and it worked?
No specific examples, but I can assure you nearly everybody that comes to you is going to have issues with that self-care because, when you have those, when I was talking about the blue zones and how, the residents of those communities all implement basically all six of those, different aspects of their life. Once all of those are in balance, then, everything's good and happy. Well, if they're coming to you because they have chronic symptoms and, they were diagnosed with a chronic illness or something years back, then there's already something out of balance, and it's just like a pebble in a pond. It could have been something as simple as, they were neglecting their family or their self or something like that. And it just, escalates into something else.
Well, I mean, yeah, and it's a good point. I definitely agree with you now, because again, I was kind of blind to it before. It was a blind spot in my own healing journey that
Hmm.
everyone that comes to us is going to need to address this to some degree. I just, and listen, maybe it exists, maybe it doesn't, but I have never yet seen a case of autoimmunity or cancer where there was not a clear, identifiable like trauma or major stressor in the person's life, especially recently, after the or before the diagnosis. And even more importantly, I think you've probably noticed this in the FDN community. And I love my community. I'm a part of this, but we are like very type A dominant. So it's kind of interesting how many former type A individuals we have, or recovering type A's, we'll call them, because, we burned ourselves out. And then we go and have to figure it out, and we realize, hey, we do need to take care of ourselves a little more. So, Kurt, in terms of your business, who is like your ideal client? And I always like to ask this because, I mean, seriously, this is your time. This is the type of person that if they have these characteristics and they come to you, you're like, yes, I can't wait to work with you. And then, of course, where can they find that business as well?
Sure. My ideal client is I because as FDNs, theoretically, they're going to be the last person that they need to come to, because you not only help them heal themselves, but you're also teaching them, and it's, teach a man to fish kind of thing. So they go off and they're able to make those healthy decisions that kind of stick with them, time after time. But my ideal client is the one that's felt like they've reached the end of their ropes, because we've all been there. We've all felt like, more people than not has felt unheard by their physician, by their doctors, by different specialists that they've gone to. And, when they feel like they've reached the end of their rope, and then they come to you and they're dragging in because they're so used to, not making any progress, especially when working on their health, and then they see that light at the end of the tunnel and they get excited and motivated that this is it. This makes sense. This feels like it's going to work. And I think the important part of that is they feel like it's going to work. And once you feel like this is it, you're getting into that mindset that we've been talking about. And so then that just paves the way for their success.
It's a beautiful thing, and it's universal with FDN and FDN Thrive. When you get here, it's such a shame that you got here so late, because we can still help you now. Imagine what we could have done 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And you're right. So many people are at the end of their ropes. I remember and I don't mean in a dramatic way. It's something I share publicly. I wasn't even depressed at the time, but I had so many physical health issues after kind of conquering my mental health stuff that I was just like, I was 18 and I knew I couldn't do this for another 60 years. I'll put it that way,
Mm-hmm.
and I knew I needed something quick because I'm just going to give up. I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. And, I just kind of asked you two questions, so I apologize. Where can people find your biz though? Because I don't think you mentioned that.
Sure. So my practice is Stradtman Family Wellness. You can visit it at stradtmanfamilywellness.com. And if you go to the resources section on my website, I actually have a free download of the social or self-care wheel that you can actually fill out yourself. So
cool, and get it checked out. All right. Well,
yeah.
guys, thank you so much for tuning into another episode of The Real Results Show. We are live every Wednesday at 12 p.m. PST, 3 p.m. EST. We've been talking to Kurt Stradtman today. And again, if you want to hear more from Kurt, you can actually go to the FDN Thrive podcast. I honestly can't remember what episode Kurt's was. He was in like the teens or something, but the names are all there, so you can get that checked out. Kurt, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much.